The Tacoma is officially back together as a pickup truck. The bed is now on, fresh off my last video. It didn't take a whole lot of work to bolt that thing onto the frame. Once that was done, I actually had a guy come out and remove the windshield because it was cracked left and right, up and down, looked like a tic-tac-toe board. I asked him if he could just leave it out for me for the weekend so that I could attend to some rust that was hiding underneath. I want to make sure that it was something that I could repair before you put the new windshield in. Fortunately, it doesn't look that bad. I think once I get it cleaned up and sealed, it's going to be just fine. It'll last a long time. If I left it alone, I think a few more years and it might have rusted through the metal. Let's get a closer look at the rust situation under the windshield. The original thing that tipped me off was just these bubbles up top. And I was like, man, if it's there, hopefully underneath there's metal left. I know it doesn't look great, but once it gets cleaned up, I'm really hoping it's not too bad. I'll be able to prep it and seal it and maybe not have to cut any metal out. There's also some areas, if you pan down here to this corner and the other corner, bottom corner of the glass right there. I didn't know those were even there, so it's a good thing that this windshield got taken out now, and then I can address those. Those are really not that bad, so I'll be able to clean that stuff out. All this was kind of hiding under the outside edge of the windshield because it's got like a rubber, plastic, whatever trim that goes all the way around. Didn't even know that was down there. This is a good opportunity now to clean the dash. Unfortunately, I didn't find any $100 bills stuffed down in there. You can look inside the truck as well. It's very dirty in there. I haven't cleaned it in a while. I have no real reason to now. Another thing that stands out is there's a piece of seat missing. Quick backstory. Previous owner, the original owner that bought this truck, he had his dog in the truck. And he went into the store to grab something. When he came out, the dog had chewed the seat and a little chunk of the steering wheel and some other stuff that he left in the truck. So definitely not a good boy. Bad boy. And I don't think the owner was very pleased, but obviously he didn't do anything about it, and neither did I. So I left it that way all these years. I do plan to eventually get some different seats. I don't know what I'm going to put in there yet. I'll figure that out later. But for now, I'm going to get this windshield cleaned up so that I can get the guy back out here to install the new one. I carefully picked away and wire brushed all the rust that I could get off of the affected areas. And then I grabbed my phosphoric acid and I used one of my wife's old makeup brushes because I'm sure not going to be ruining my makeup brushes. And I brushed it on just carefully in the affected areas. And as you can see now, where it was just unknown, it's cleaned up and converted. This side's actually going to be fine. There's just a tiniest little through hole where it's on the back side of the metal by just past the spot weld. By the time this is painted, treated and painted, and then they put their primer over top of it and then the urethane sealer, that's not going to be a problem. Let me go down to the other side because that's the least affected. This is the other area of concern. As you can see, that did open up a bit. Everything else is pretty solid, but right there in the tight bottom of that angle, it did end up thinning out and poking through. That's going to have to get fixed because it's not going to be sealing over that. And then down here, it also went through at that point. So I'm going to have to try to cut a chunk of this out and weld something in. Unfortunately, there's not really any other way to simply fill that. I definitely don't think I'd try to put some kind of silicone caulk or, braze it or, epoxy. I just don't think any of those are good ideas. I think, this is one of those situations where you just got to buck up and fix it the right way with some steel. So let me climb up top. This was the worst of it, as I thought. You can see that underneath there on that angle where it did rust through. So the rust was the only thing keeping it from leaking water and the fact that it's on a more of a downward angle. I'm going to have to try to cut a nice clean line, sand back the paint, because it's going to burn off anyways when I weld it, and then make a repair piece that can overlap that. So we'll see how that's going to go, and I'll get at that next. I've been sitting on top of the truck under this thick packing blanket. I have several layers of thick cardboard and then some foam pad just to try to protect the hood and distribute the weight so I don't do any damage to the dash or the hood. So just in case people are wondering, it's also catching a lot of the metal debris and stuff because I didn't really feel like masking the entire cab of the truck off. That, and as you saw before, it's not very clean in there, but I don't want to make a giant mess. So here's a progress update. I did take my really thin cutoff wheel over there and I cut 2 straight lines because I knew that this was the really rusty part, as you can see where it's thin right in the center. This edge right here that's rolled down, that's actually still really thick. It wasn't that pitted. So I was hoping that I could just cut a clean line about, almost a 1/4 inch down so that any welding I do will be below this point. You won't really hopefully have as much effect on the panel. If I cut this corner off, that's going to take some strength out of it, and then when I weld it on the thin metal, it's more likely going to move around. And I don't do a lot of sheet metal body work, but I didn't want to get into the heating and shrinking and messing around with warps in the panel. So I think that's going to help me a little bit. I use that cutoff wheel to make 2 straight cuts there, and then to get these side cuts, there wasn't a lot of room to really get in there with anything. So what I ended up doing was using this cylindrical straight cut carbide burr. So let's see if it'll zoom in there. So if you run this, real carefully down that edge and cut through just enough, I was able to whittle that out. And then you can see one spot weld there, there's a spot weld here, and there's a spot weld just over here. So I'm planning to get this a little bit cleaner, make a piece to fill in here, bend it so that it fits in there just right, and then I'm going to do my best to TIG weld it and not screw anything up. The roof panel's been all cleaned up and prepped. Here's some of the little chunks of metal I cut out of there. Now that that's all cleaned up and squared off, I was able to get some nice clean lines and take some measurements. So I did that and transferred it to this little template. I also measured the thickness of the good steel. It appears to be about 35 thou or 20 gauge. Sounds about right for most body work. So I think I have some of that laying around my shop. I'll be able to transfer this to a piece and then get it bent up. Pretty simple. This should fit right up in here. Oh, how I love climbing on this truck. Oh. So this is going to pop in here. As you can see, that was kind of what I had in mind. Now, this is a mostly straight shot. There's just the slightest curve to it. So I don't think I'm going to have to get too crazy in forming this, like shrinking and stretching and do anything, along those lines. If it was, in one of these corners where it was had a lot of compound curvatures and things, I'd be having my work cut out for me. So in a way, this is going to be hopefully an easier piece to patch. I'm going to get that cut out next and start tigging it in. The repair patch has been finished up. I added some spot welding holes here so I can attach it to the truck. I wiped it all down with degreaser, and then I coated it with some phosphoric acid metal etch just to kind of further clean and prep it. Did the same thing up here on the truck itself. I scraped the rust off, and I used a wire brush and several treatments of the phosphoric acid metal etch to get it prepped. It's all wiped down. You can see this patch goes in here and fits very nicely. Even better when I can hold it just right. It'll get clamped in place, and I'm going to be going as careful as I can with the TIG and try not to introduce too much heat. I'm going to try to get this thing welded in place. Check it out. That's the final result. I think it turned out pretty great. I was really careful welding it, trying to put too much heat in this panel. I kind of went back and forth with it, and then I would stop and put a fan on this just to try to cool it down. My concerns were burning a whole bunch of paint off and introducing a lot of heat that it would warp the panel. Didn't have any of those problems. Once it was all welded, I ground it down with my 90 and some sanding discs, and then I went over it with the Scotch-Brite to kind of polish it up. So it looks really nice. Now I can prep it for primer and paint so I can get this all sealed up before the windshield goes back in. Up top here, I had to get a little bit further up on this because there was some pitting, small rust pits in there. So if it really bothers me later, I might try to blend it into the panel. At this point, I don't really care about it. So just want to get this truck back together so it can be on the road. And I'll do a very similar repair down on the passenger side where there's some rust through on that corner. I figured I'd show this anyway. I cut out more than I needed to because that small hole that was there was not really a good way to cut a little patch just in the center and try to weld that. And also with rust and crust inside of there, all those impurities in the weld, it's just going to be popping and bubbling and making all kinds of nasties. So, and I really need this to be a good repair. It's not going to bleed water through. So I cut it back more than I needed to. I came up with a little template, and then I transferred that to this little piece here. Fits real nice. There's a little spot weld hole, should be plenty for this. There's a little more than just an angle going on here. It's kind of curves down this way. So once I got it close, I actually had to put a bend in it and also kind of hammer and dolly it so that it has a little bit of a curve into it. It fits really well. I'm going to tack it in and kind of maybe massage it a little bit if needed. Get this finished up. Here's the end result of this patch repair. I think it turned out pretty good. I got it welded up, ground down smooth. Now I can treat this metal, and then I'll throw some primer and paint at it to get it all sealed up. This will be a good long-term repair. I won't have to worry about water leaking through the pillar, continuing to rust this all out. I'm glad I was able to put a stop to it now. So I'll get all these spots treated, painted, and then the windshield can go back in. The paintwork's been finished up. I didn't go too crazy. I just went to local auto parts store and grabbed some Duplicolor exact match paint. It's supposed to match this color code, but it's not really that close. I didn't expect it to be perfect because this truck is 20 years old. The weather and the sun's had its effects on the paint. It's quite a bit duller now. But the main thing was to get paint over the new metal. I've got primer coats, paint, and clear coat. I did do a wet sand on there to kind of scuff it up once it was cured. That way the primer has got something to bond to. Here's the bigger panel up top. That was a lot bigger stretch, so you can really see the difference in the coloring of the paint. The main thing, again, was to get this protected so it's not going to continue to rust or leak water. But it's beyond the sealing area of the windshield, so if I really want to get in here and block this down with some primer and then try to blend this paint in later, you know, properly, I can do that. For now, I just really got to get this thing, not a rush job, but get it done quick enough that I can get this windshield back in the truck. So next thing I got to do is get the interior back together. The headliner's got to go in. I spent a little time kind of cleaning the dash and any other areas that are easy to get to now while I can. I also ordered this little hinge kit right here. This little guy, I think I grabbed this, yeah, it was on Amazon. It's real cheap, but this thing broke. I don't even know when it broke. These little plastic dog bones. I got the just basic aluminum block kit. It's super cheap, really not that hard to install. So it goes, you know, right here in this back window. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of hiding in there. There it is. Works great. So cheap option. Didn't take too long to install. It's actually easier just to, with this trim loose, to get in there, unbolt it, and press those roll pins out and get that in there. So now all I gotta do is get the interior fully back together, and then the guy can come get the windshield in. Check it out. The new glass is installed. No more cracks. Looking good. It's had some time to cure. I did notice this wiper arm is installed a little low. I might have to clock that up some. But real happy to get this project done. Not the most exciting, but definitely necessary. Sometimes, you know, you get into these surprises, and I didn't think the rust was that extensive, but it did need to be corrected. I was able to fix it myself. Not real happy with the exact match paint, but again, there is paint protection down underneath the ceiling area, all the edges that I did repair. So if I want to come back later and, you know, sand this and paint it correctly, I can do that. Without having to worry about pulling the glass again. So, but it is finished. Thought it was an informative video. Hopefully if anybody's in the same situation, they can save their vehicle, because a lot of glass companies will not reinstall the glass if there's rust issues. So hopefully you find it helpful, and now I can get on to more exciting stuff with this truck.